you very much for the invitation to speak at your symposium. I know the original plan was that I would say a few words, say a lot of words, potentially about Horizon Europe, but that's not possible because I think, as many of you are aware, the negotiations are still going on between the member states on the final budgets for the multi-annual financial framework. So all I could have presented would be some slides that I think you would have been already familiar with, the structure of the program, how it foresees the various pillars, how it foresees the missions and the partnerships. So what I can tell you is that in practical terms, that we are dependent on this decision being reached on the next multi-annual financial framework. And we don't know when that will be. Work is progressing on the work program. But I think probably a best case scenario might be an adoption date in April and things kicking off in mid-April. But you have to take that with a bit of a pinch of salt because it's not official and it all depends on how those negotiations go. So that's my disclaimer, and I'm afraid the extent to which I can really talk about Horizon Europe at this point, beyond saying things that I think you're already familiar with. So if it's okay with you, I thought I would at least go through some things that are part of the policy environment for digital health at the moment, which of course, I mean, the spending programs really are there to implement the overarching framework. So I think this at least gives you a kind of view of the landscape behind these spending programs when they come on stream. So the first thing I wanted to tell you about is the Data Governance Act, which is an act that the Commission has adopted a proposal for just last week. And it's got relevance to data generally, and it's got relevance to the health data space. And the reason that that this is thought to be important is, for example, if you saw it in the COVID pandemic, we saw instances where we had actors who wanted to be able to share data. For example, one way was through a project that we were funding called Escalate for COV, which was about pharmaceutical companies sharing their molecule data in a big database and bringing high performance to bear on it. And this did indeed finally result in a candidate for repurposing for COVID treatments. But the point was, it was very hard to do at the beginning because there weren't the mechanisms for sharing data, particularly sensitive health data. So this Data Governance Act starts to try and fill in these governance gaps in the frameworks. Now this is a little slide that will give you an overview, in fact, of what else is coming up, a forward timetable. So we've got the Data Governance Act now, just to put this in context and to show you that it's part of a series of bits of the framework that will be developed over the next year or so. And the Data Governance Act is particularly focused on things like public sector and data that's voluntarily made available by data holders. And then subsequently, before the end of the year, there should be a proposal for a Digital Market Act, which is looking more at the data held by platforms, and then more actions in 2021, an implementing act under the Open Data Directive, which will look at high value open data sets, and then a Data Act in the third quarter of 2021, which is more about the co-generated Internet of Things data generated by individuals and industry, for example. I'm just going to give you then a very brief highlight of this Data Governance Act as it relates, the bits that relate to health, I think most pertinently. It has 4 pillars. One is about reusing sensitive data held by public sector bodies, of course, very pertinent for health because a lot of the data is held by hospitals, for example. It also sets up a framework. The second pillar is about setting up a framework for new data intermediaries or data brokers that will help govern particular national data spaces. The third pillar is about making this concept of data altruism easier, which I'll explain in a moment. And the fourth pillar is an overarching entity, to set up an overarching entity called the European Data Innovation Board, which would have a role to look for linkages and ways to make interoperable all the different data spaces, which you can see at the top of the slide, and health being, of course, just one of those. So this chapter around data brokers. Well, the inspiration is really what we've seen developed. I think it sounds like you've already discussed this a little bit today. In Finland, for example, and in health, where they've set up a competent authority with a role to support curate and support the use of health data across the national data space, as it were. So the idea is to promote this across all sectors where there's a health data space developing or data space per se, and particularly for the health data space. So the aim is to see these models proliferate across Europe. The second aspect, as relates to data altruism, is really about this idea that we sense that there's a lot of people, there's a groundswell of people who are interested to donate their data, or not donate so much, but make available their data for example, research and innovation purposes, but they don't know how to do it. So this is about creating a mechanism across Europe that will enable this to happen by setting up what would be called data altruism organizations, and making sure that these organizations have a particular character that makes them extremely trustworthy. So that they're not profit making, that they're managed by the public sector, they work for the public good, and so forth. So that's to make that easier, and we hope that can have particularly an impact on the health data space and help support data, the linkage into data there. And so that's one act of many that is fulfilling one of the 4 pillars then of the overarching data strategy. Which again, we like to have 4 pillars in all our acts. And this has also got 4 pillars. It's a very sturdy structure, I think, for a regulation. So this data strategy, of course, has 1 pillar on governance, so that the Data Governance Act is a step towards that. And you saw there were more steps coming in the course of 2021 about, making sure that these data spaces are well governed and people can fundamentally trust what's happening with their data, particularly important, of course, for health data. The second pillar is about investing in really big enablers, what we were calling internally the big ticket items, really big bits of infrastructure, perhaps high performance computing, or very large sort of interconnecting bits at the European level that could cost an awful lot of money, with an idea that the Commission and the member states would jointly create these large enablers that could then support the flow of data generally across the European Union, across all data spaces, whether it's perhaps cloud infrastructure or indeed high performance computing. The third pillar is very much on the competences and investing in the skills of the professionals, or the skills that of people that we need for the innovation and the SME community. On the one hand, or the medical professionals who can use the data, or the scientists and the researchers, and then secondly, of course, the literacy in the population, so that we have a population who can feel empowered to use their data and appreciate its value and understand how it's being used appropriately. And the third and the fourth pillar, of course, is the actual rollout of the European data spaces, which health is one. And then within this, I think I can see that you've already used a slide very similar, but within all these data spaces, there's common activities happening, the development of these technical tools and tools for interoperability and standardization. And of course, in the health sphere, we're talking about the recommendation for the European Electronic Health Record Exchange format and developing these specifications. And we have a project ongoing now that are developing the next generation of technical specifications, which will then be able to encourage the uptake of across the European Union. Or they're also, in all the data spaces, there's work going on around data governance and data agreements. This is sometimes at the level of the particular data set. So for example, in genomics data, which we're working on, we see that there's a particular set of stakeholders who are very key to the collection and curation of this data, and very particular kinds of users. So I think probably we'd see data agreements created at the level of the data set in that case. And then, of course, the need, and this is very pertinent to health, to see the capacity developed across health and care systems, for example. So I think we'll see a lot of funds made available for that kind of purpose, whether it's from the Digital Europe programme or the new European EU for Health programme, or potentially as part of the Recovery and Resilience Fund. But we'll see a lot of funds for that, for member states to make those investments where they see the most need. So one of the key funding tools that we have on our side is the Digital Europe programme. And this, I think, is also something, of course, where I cannot say too much about exactly when it'll be agreed, because again, it's dependent on the MFF, but I think there will be calls coming out that could be of interest to your community. And we're hoping that this might be something that we will be able to launch around about February time. But again, please take that with a pinch of salt, because it all depends on when we get the agreement sorted out. But we're busy working on a work program for the first 2 years of this program as it relates to, from our unit, as it relates to the health spending. But it's a very large program. Of course, what it aims to do is to pick up where Horizon Europe leaves off. So if Horizon Europe is for getting the proof of concept, then we want to see under Digital Europe program, we want to see the deployment of these concepts, of these tested technologies, for example, across the data sets, across the data spaces. So we envisage a range of actions, of course, not just health related. This shows you the range of actions from boosting the functioning of the high performance computing, to developing actions under cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, advanced digital skills, as I've already mentioned, and deploying infrastructures in key areas, such as in the area of destination Earth, or particular technologies where we think they're very pertinent to data sharing, such as blockchain. On our side, on the health side, what we're foreseeing is that we'd use the Digital Europe for certainly developing these sort of trusted data sets in the field of genomics and in cancer imaging, where we hope to see the development of large repository of anonymized cancer images as a new data source. We're also looking at these testing and experimentation facilities, which I might say a word more later. Investing in supporting an ecosystem to develop around cybersecurity, which we can see is it's going to be critical for the functioning of a data space, and helping ecosystems develop around promising new technologies. For example, one of them might be this technology around digital twins, which Europe has a lot of sort of emerging centers looking at these kinds of technologies, and we'd like to see these funds help these ecosystems really come together and create critical mass and take off. This concept of testing and experimentation facilities, these would be very large investments. We'd see a handful of these across Europe, with the idea that they'd be resources for innovators to come and test their products towards the end stage, and linking access to data for training of the AI component with access to real world settings. So you'd have access, for example, to hospitals, to patients, or if it's a technology for use in the home, maybe access to kind of home-like conditions if you want to test sensors and these kinds of things. And it's a concept we're looking at across the data spaces, and we see these concepts emerging in a way organically. You have, for example, in Sweden and Finland, you already have these kinds of the technology centers linking up the data available there with large sort of hospital facilities. So, but it's something that we'd like to see developed as a resource across Europe, and linked then with this concept of digital innovation hubs, which would be more generic resources that in each region that would help digital innovators to know what resources are out there for them, and then they could be pointed towards the testing and experimentation facility and book their time there for when they need it for their product. Just a word on cybersecurity. Of course, I think everyone's aware that that we see these incidents growing across Europe, and that they're getting increasingly serious. And there was even a woman whose death appears to have been caused by a cyber attack because it delayed her treatment. So this is something the Commission is obviously developing a landscape generally for security, whether, I mean, not just in cybersecurity, but in all the various elements around e-privacy, on e-identity, so setting up the tools to be used for secure access into systems. On the health side, you've got acts like the medical devices regulations that set out cybersecurity requirements. You've got the Network and Information Security Directive, which requires member states to designate critical infrastructures and healthcare facilities that are in there, and this is going through a revision at the moment. We've had the Cybersecurity Act, which has given a strengthened role to ENISA, the European cybersecurity body. So this is a really developing scene, and something that I think the Commission's we're very keen to see how we can support a thriving cybersecurity ecosystem. You know, fully aware that at the level of many different healthcare institutions, we're going to need to have these resources that they can, services that they can call upon to boost their security of the health data that they're in control of. So that was just a little run through then, and with apologies for not being able to say more on the big programs, which I think was most interest to you, but just to give you then a feel for the policy landscape, because I think as the calls come through, I think it's helpful for you to have in mind what else is going on. So I think as you prepare your responses to calls that will inevitably come in 2021.